Derek with us?
Derek is going to be via Zoom today, and he should be right there. Derek, we can't see you.
Oh, all right. Can you hear me, Ben?
Yes, we can.
All right, hold on. I'm just maybe my little thing that slides over the lens. Oh, here we go.
Yeah,
How's that?
that's good. And we are live.
Okay, Derek, 864, 8645 is the restorative justice bill. And I think many of us are becoming more and more confused.
Well,
So,
for the record, yep.
Was particularly, I think we left off is section 4 of the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Here's for the record, Derek Miodevnik, Community and Restorative Justice Executive with Vermont Department of Corrections. And to your point, it's a textured landscape, restorative justice in Vermont, insofar as it derives state funding from at least 3 major state level institutions: Department for Children and Families, Department of Corrections, Office of the Attorney General. It consists of a mix of statutorily enshrined services and some discretionary funded services as far as the DOC's funding. It has statutory expressions scattered throughout multiple titles, and it's grown up and it's evolved in a way that so I think the casual observer and maybe even the studied observer would find it vexing. And one of the questions, to just take a half step back and then go forward, that you had posed in previous conversation, Chair Sears, is there a need for a study as written into H645 on post-adjudication reparative? And my analysis is yes, because within this sort of complex world of RJ, even the reparative probation program doesn't derive its funding from a consistently clear mechanism, despite the fact that the Department of Corrections is statutorily required to provide a reparative process throughout the state. And the means by which we do that is through discretionary grants to community partners. And the original naming convention for those partners was community justice centers. And so there was a point in time when I believe, to make consistent the function of operating reparative boards as defined in statute, Title 24, Chapter 58 was established to give some consistency and universality to the notion of what was called the Community Justice Center. But I think a couple things have evolved and changed since that time that have unfortunately produced more confusion than clarity. I think one of the things that's changed over time is that DOC has layered into the scope of work other fantastic and effective evidence-based work, but it changes the nature of what the original codification of a center was. And then other entities have also ported into the legislative definition of a community justice center as defined in Title 24. And so the version of the bill as written talks about—
Can you know the page for us, please?
Yeah, so I was about to reference page 59 of 59, section 10,
Yep,
redesignation. And the bill as currently drafted would essentially, if I understand redesignation correctly, copy and paste the existing statutory language in 24 VSA 1961 through 1969 and move that into the corrections statutes in 28 VSA. And I don't want to presume the exact intent of that, and I'm not sure if that was Ledge Counsel Ben Novogroski, who's been working incredibly hard on this. But my sense is that because of the origin of Title 24, and that it defined, sorry if you heard ambient guitar falling there. My cat just walked into a guitar. My sense is that the original language in 24 really sought to codify reparative boards. And of course, the study now in H645 is meant to look and clarify a universal funding source and consistent access to it. But DOC is not in support of redesignating Title 24 into 28 because of the features that I mentioned earlier. It really is not a particularly instructive or technically clarifying statute such that it would improve matters to move it into 28. The work that DOC currently does is not actually enabled by Title 24. And as an administrator who's been part of these conversations for years about what is and is not a community justice center, I do think Title 24 brings more confusion than anything else. So I can't speak for the other institutions that are explicitly or implicitly implicated in Title 24, such as the Office of the Attorney General and the Center for Crime Victim Services. But speaking for DOC, I don't see that we are an appropriate home for that statute as written. So I'll pause there.
Ben?
Well, for the record, Ben Novogroski from the Office of Legislative Counsel.
I'm totally confused because I don't have in front of me 24 VSA 1961 to 1969.
Yeah, so those are the Community Justice Center statutes, and as Mr. Reed-Dubnick said, it's a redesignation. It's purely just moving those statutes to Title 28. There was testimony and discussions with sponsors of the bill about a more appropriate location, and that potentially Title 28 being that location, which is why it was moved. And respectfully, Mr. Reed-Dubnick, I mean, those are conversations that we've had too, about Title 28 being a more appropriate location. So obviously it's at the on the whim of the committee about what they would like to do, but those are the reasons why that redesignation is present.
I guess I'm
And thank you, Ledge Counsel Novogroski, and thank you for reminding me of that. There have frankly been so many conversations about that some of the older ones. I think at issue here is that there are, again, at least 3 primary government state level institutions that provide financial support and administrative support for the operation of community-based restorative justice programs. Again, I'm referencing the Department for Children and Families and the BARGE program, the multiple programs that come out of the Community Justice Office of the Office of the Attorney General, and then, of course, the services that flow through DOC. And I do believe that there is an opportunity and that the original construct of a community justice center as articulated in Title 24 could be a holding space for how the state across its various institutions that fund RJ on the local level, perhaps better coordinate and better braid and better blend their separate funding so that it has the most positive impact on a regional level. I think the question becomes whether that would be the most corrections or the AGO or DCF would be any more appropriate than perhaps Title 13 or a state. I think there's been prior conversation in this committee, and Senator Vahovsky, and forgive me if I'm really stumbling. Can you correct me if I got your name wrong, Senator?
Vahovsky, you are very close.
Okay, thank you. I'm Mia Dovnik, so I'm used to it, but I got to get these things right. I remember a comment you made a couple of weeks ago about like, is it really, do we need a bigger conversation about the various parts of this sort of elephant, so to speak? And I think that question swirls around this conversation right now about Title 24. So Ben Novogrodsky is absolutely correct. We've discussed language in 28 around justice centers, and so it's not a but, and I think Title 24 would really require a massive overhaul to take it obviously out of a municipal context and really be a statement that aligns with 28-2A. It's the policy of the state to use restorative justice, but how we do that across state government, I think, is really the question at hand. And I think that that's the source of confusion, Senator Sears.
I think that the real issue is expressed in page 37 of the Council of State Government's Justice Reinvestment 2 Working Group.
And that's what Jay Johnson referenced last week.
I agree with her. This bill doesn't get to some of those problems, and part of the reason is that your programs are administered by 20 local community justice centers from discretionary grants administered by DOC, and the CSG found the data collection and outcome reports are inconsistent. Some programs may be duplicating efforts depending upon their structures and target populations. Referrals to programs rely on local actors, principally state attorneys, which also leads to variations who'd able to receive and participate, and so forth. And diversion opportunities, we have the diversion programs like Tamarack Pretrial Services overseen by the Community Justice Division of the Attorney General's Office. So it gets very confusing. We have 3 different agencies providing services, and those services have to be delivered in the community. And it's got to be frustrating for, I hear both about the budget problems of these community agencies as well, and I'm sure you do too, Derek, as well as the frustrations of these local agencies in dealing with so many different players. So, Ben, how does this bill, I guess I need to hear from the other witnesses, but I keep in mind, does this bill address the problems that I just read?
I think the question before the committee on some level is there an appetite to take a iterative approach and look at reparative and pre-charge diversion and an expansion of pre-charge diversion and a clarification of reparative as an important step? And I believe yes to that. My position has been that the study on rep is still important. I also want to flag a letter sent by the Office of Racial Equity and attached to last Thursday's documents and handouts that also seeks to explicitly raise the equity focus on this. And I do think as we seek to expand restorative justice, it's incumbent upon us to make explicit and intentional and consider the resource and operational implications of making sure that we're not unwittingly expanding any pre-existing discrepancies and biases. So I do want to just flag that piece. But I think the question is an iterative step sufficient, and or are we not taking on the whole kit and caboodle, if you will? And a lot of effort and time could be put into legislating this expansion of pre-charge diversion and clarifying who pays for pre-charge diversion and what that means for DOC. But I think you'll still be left with the fundamental confusing layout of this farmhouse, as the analogy I often use is. And so, do I think it represents progress? I do. Do I think if we're going to spend the time and energy in a thoughtful and deliberative process to envision the future of restorative justice, which is a major asset in this state, and this state is a crown jewel in this country in terms of its application of restorative justice, then I think it's a yes and that would be my point. That we need to actually look at the entire structure and try to build something for the future that is resilient, that is intentional, that reflects our commitment to restorative justice across the agencies that fund it, that invite other sources of funding into it. And lastly, to still ensure the same high quality work that does happen on the local level. I know my colleagues, Jill Evans and Joseph Levanway, are about to testify, and the quality of their programs is fantastic. Please hear that. We have to do the hard thing that state government has to do. How do we equitably distribute a limited resource in a way that gets great quality and still is scalable and sustainable? And the challenge we found on the sustainable level is that we're so aggregate that we're running into funding challenges. So how do we maintain the local ownership of involvement, but regionalize the administrative operations of this infrastructure that we should be very proud of? So thank you.
Well, this thing has gotten me so confused and so disjointed that I don't even want to deal with the bill, to be honest with you, but I have to. And I think this bill really is a mess right now as it comes to us.
So to try to answer the question as
about it being a mess.
Well,
no reflection on you.
I'll address that. I think you really need to look at this bill as doing many things at the same time. It is not a wholesale paradigm shift at one. And it took 2 years to get to the bill in this form. So to do a wholesale paradigm shift that would essentially address the funding issue would take much longer and probably would receive much more pushback based on the testimony that's been received so far. So what this bill does is multiple things at once. It creates the pre-charge program at the outset. It separates the funding for that pre-charge program from coming from DOC to emanating from the Attorney General. It also creates or preserves the funding from DOC to support the post-adjudication programs that it's currently engaged in. At the same time, it creates studies that would be responsible, that would be submitted by the AG's office and DOC to address more sustainable funding structures in the future. So that's the piece that is not being addressed now, but it is starting the process to address that massive concept. It also creates a study committee to establish a more solidified role for DOC to expand their pre-charge or their post-adjudication reparative work to reparative people sentenced to reparative boards and probation. It could expand beyond that, but right now that's the study that's been chosen. So in a nutshell, that's what the bill does. It's an attempt to separate pre-charge and post-charge operations to the Attorney General's office and to DOC, and sets the state on the path to explore more stable funding structures through studies, but we're not there to, this bill does not implement those strategies yet. So this is an incremental step towards a broader paradigm shift based off of a 2-year conversation and evolution that you see before you.
Thank you very much. Very helpful. One question, and then I want to make time for the two witnesses who drove all the way here from somewhere in
Yeah,
Vermont.
I know at least one of our witnesses is from my neck of the woods in
Yes, I
Essex. So I sat down with Willa Farrell earlier this week, who made some charts and graphs that tried to streamline kind of what it is doing. And if those are helpful, I can ask Willa to share them. Okay. So not a question, just a further information.
Why don't we start with Heather McCain, McLean.
Jill Evans.
Heather, are you?
Jill Evans.
I'm sorry, where am I?
You're in the morning, or earlier in the morning.
I'm sorry. Jill Evans, Director of the Essex Community Justice Center.
Yes, if it is okay with the committee, Joseph and I spent
That would be great. Yeah.
great deal of time preparing
Okay.
testimony that for both of us, we have a copy of it in writing, and we talked about Joseph presenting that testimony to you. And
Sounds good. Why don't you both come on up?
I have just a few comments after.
Just identify yourself for the record.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Joseph Levanway. I'm the director of the South Burlington Community Justice Center.
And I'm Jill Evans. I'm the director of the Essex Community Justice Center.
And as Joe mentioned, we have copies of our testimony to hand out to everybody. So should have enough copies here. There you go.
Justice Centers deal with corrections. They don't
I think the reason that Joseph and I asked to be able to testify in front of this committee about H 645 is that we are in a unique position as community justice directors in the Chittenden County area who have been deeply embedded in our municipalities for over 30 years and who have been successfully running a very robust pre-charge program for over 10 years. And our concern is that H 645 potentially could dismantle all of that work that has been done at a local level. So we appreciate you making time for us to come in and share some of our concerns.
Yeah, I concur with Jill's thoughts. Once again, thank you for just allowing us to come and testify regarding H 645. We definitely welcome the opportunity to expand restorative justice services as well as stabilize funding, but there are certainly some areas of concern that we would like to bring forth. We appreciate the support of continuing the valuable role that restorative justice plays in our greater system of criminal justice. In addition to the restorative benefits that we offer, that our programs offer, that we provide to victims and offenders alike, the state also benefits significant savings when it comes to court and case management costs, as well as low recidivism rates for those who complete the program. This speaks to the quality of our programming. So when we're talking about things such as, the court case backlog, things of that nature, the work that the CJCs, particularly in Chittenden County, have been doing with pre-charge for the past 10 to 15 years has been contributing significantly to decreasing folks going through a traditional court process rather successfully through our pre-charge programming. As H 645 has moved through the legislative process, we've heard the underlying assumption that streamlining restorative justice programming and funding will benefit Vermonters. We're not aware of any clear evidence or data to support that notion. It's important to remember that restorative justice programs in Vermont evolve from the nature of community. The programs are administered by and for local community members. And indeed, they do vary across the state. So that's something to keep in mind as we walk through some of the provisions in H 645 that remain areas of concern. The first area we'd like to bring up is funding. So H 645 does not specifically address the issue of funding when and if these provisions go into effect. The goals of H645, including moving pre-charge and post-charge cases that are currently funded through DOC to the AGO, simply cannot be accomplished without funding. The DOC funding structure for restorative justice, as many of y'all know, and Derek kind of touched upon, is not stable. DOC funds us with discretionary funds, which have included one-time funds over the years. In addition, the funding from DOC is not adequate enough to support staffing and programming needs across the CJCs across the state. We have heard DOC testify both in the House and in this committee that they have plans for funds that will be freed up once the AGO assumes full financial responsibility for pre-charge and post-charge cases. It is just not clear what those plans are and how that is going to affect CJC programming. So there's a couple of requests that we have, when it comes to funding, and questions, essentially is, will community justice centers remain in the same precarious funding position that we are in now for post-adjudication restorative justice programming that DOC will continue to fund? Where will these new funds come from, and in what amount, in order for the AGO to award grants and contracts in their expanded capacity per H645? And how will these dollar amounts be determined? This needs to be determined with data, and the data will depend on state's attorney's policy. So I'll pause there for that section if anybody has any thoughts or questions.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
Ben has a.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
So, specifically with relation to data, this bill includes much broader data collection than previously exists, because it really doesn't exist, especially for CJCs themselves. So in order to get to the steps that I think they're testifying about, this bill does accomplish a step towards that. They are correct in saying that this bill does not address funding specifically. It does not, it never did. But what it does is to encourage greater geographic equity throughout the state. The tool that was selected was to make funding contingent on the adoption of the state's attorney's policy. The reason why that was done was for a few reasons. Number one was constitutional concerns.
Yeah, by the way, we're talking about the House bill, not the Senate bill. There is no Senate bill right now.
Okay, my mistake, sorry.
Yeah, I mean,
I just misspoke.
we haven't, I just want to make clear to everybody, we haven't adopted the House bill, so.
Yeah, it was
It's really the House, as passed by the House.
The House passed version.
Thank you.
My apologies. Never addressed that. But in order to encourage that geographic equity across the state, that essentially that enforcement mechanism, for lack of a better term, was created to do that. And if state's attorneys choose not to adopt a policy, because that is their right as constitutionally elected officers, they will have to answer to their constituents, which involve many of the community justice centers, for not adopting the policy and leaving them without funds. So that was the way to encourage greater geographic equity that was chosen by the House, because there was really no other way to do it. And I think that's really important for the committee and for the testifiers to understand.
Chair Sears, if I could
Yep.
respond to those comments. I keep hearing that data doesn't exist. It does exist. What H645 would do is move the CJCs under the AGO's office, which would mean that we would begin using what they have, which is a database that collects their data. There is data, it's that it's not married, and that is a problem.
Well, that's the issue, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
right, but that you just say there's no data makes it sound as if the CJCs are not doing a quality job, and we have plenty of
That
data.
was not my implication. Well, my implication is that the data is not usable efficiently right now.
Right.
It exists, but what this does is create a mechanism for it to be efficiently used.
But, and to be clear, it says that to go under the AGO, we would all use the same database, and that would allow that to happen.
We've got
That's the
about
reason.
Precisely.
15 minutes left, so I want to go ahead.
Yeah, well, just, I guess my question, and I don't know if it's for Ben or the witnesses, but we've run into this repeatedly this session in various different areas, that there's no sort of centralized place for unified data. And it sounds like that is kind of rearing its head again, and this bill seeks to create that centralized space to make the data uniform and more usable. Yes, okay, thank you.
Indeed. Well, just to touch upon Ben's sentiments regarding geographic equity, you know, in thinking about this bill, I mean, if it's dependent on state's attorney policy, that's currently what we have, right? So Joe Evans and I are both directors in Chittenden County. We have state's attorney policies for all 4 CJCs in Chittenden County. We have MOUs with our police departments and the state's attorney's offices in place already in Chittenden County for all 4 of the CJCs in Chittenden County. So I think that that's important to note. You know, and talking about the notion of like one organization per county, Chittenden County is very unique. You know, it is the most populous county in the state. There are also 6 municipality-based restorative justice programs in Vermont. So we have Franklin, Grand Isle, Montpelier, Essex, South Burlington, Williston, and Burlington. As Joe mentioned, these programs are integrated into our local governments. Of these 6 programs, 4 are in Chittenden County: South Burlington, Williston, Essex, and Burlington. Chittenden County alone in FY23, the 4 CJCs have received over 500 pre-charge referrals in FY23. We've been embedded in our municipalities for over 30 years, as Joe mentioned, and that model has resulted in being able to leverage municipal dollars to enhance state funding and build strong community connections. For example, the town of Essex and Colchester contribute over $52,000 to their restorative justice program, and the city of South Burlington in FY25 will be contributing roughly $30,000 to our restorative justice center. And Williston and Burlington also have leveraged municipal dollars. H645 requires the AGO to provide grants to or contracts for services with a single municipality or organization to provide community-based restorative justice programs and services in each county. The bill as passed the House allows for the funding of more than one such organization per county until 2029. Because all Chittenden County restorative justice programs are municipality-based, if we don't allow for adequate time to work on transitioning to a potential one organization per county model, then we're at risk of losing the municipal funding that we have leveraged over the course of the 30 years that we have been working in our municipalities. A couple of requests. If the intent is to directly fund only one organization per county, it is imperative that there is enough time to adequately plan with stakeholder input for this significant transition so that there are no adverse impacts on service delivery, such as the 4-year time frame that has been set forth by the House.
And I wasn't going to interject, but municipalities are not as nimble as nonprofit organizations. There are city councils, there are select boards. The implications for Chittenden County are really profound. I can't stress that enough.
So is it your sense that 4 years is just way too few if we were going to do it a longer timeline?
Our sense is that, I mean, I think our preference would be that there be the possibility that 4 entities could be funded in Chittenden County because of our 30-year history.
Mm-hmm.
Our concern is that we first heard a willingness to accommodate a modification that would allow for a 4-year period, and now that's been reduced to something over a little over a year.
I see. In the House passed bill?
Yes.
Okay.
So in House Judiciary, it went from 1 entity to, okay, 4 years to move to 1 entity and then back to 1 entity.
And Ben.
Yeah, it was, so my understanding of what this bill is meant to do, and let me know if I'm correct, please, is that it is meant to create one space where the funding comes through, which would not implicate that funding being able to then be distributed to 4 different organizations. And I don't know if there's any implication within the bill for those 4 organizations being able to continue accepting other funding. But my understanding was the intention is not to close any of the CJCs, but to streamline the funding so that it's coming through one place.
I can answer that question.
Ben.
So the Attorney General funding is contingent on the adoption of the state's attorney's policy. However, local contributions are still permitted. So you could still receive your contributions from the municipalities themselves. Also, there's a provision in there, and again, it's still contingent on the policy adoption, but the Attorney General can approve direct funding to more than one organization, other than just the single designated one. So it wouldn't, there's a mechanism to allow for the distribution of more funding to more than one entity in a county.
And that designated, so in an instance where there's the one designated organization, they can then break that funding up to other sites.
There is a provision sort of over time that could be done, or it could be done directly through the Attorney General.
In this discussion, to point out that in Bennington County, one community justice center, in the entire county, they do get funding from various municipalities too. In the town meeting budget, it's fairly common, so.
It is certainly not my intention, nor do I think it's the intention of the House to, particularly in Chittenden County, because we are the most populous county. I don't think anyone is looking to create less service, but to help streamline and allow for more service in other places that don't have the benefits we do.
I just want to hear your concerns, so I don't want to have to leave, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I think to that point, it's important, as we've spoken about, like the quality of the work and the progression and evolution of pre-charge in Chittenden County is unique to Chittenden County in the state of Vermont. Like, we've been doing this for a very long time. We're embedded in our municipalities. We are in our police departments. We have really strong relationships. We get a pre-charge referral. It literally comes from downstairs to upstairs. We get it within a matter of days at max. But another request, which is something that Joe mentioned, would just be to consider allowing the CJCs, which receive large number of pre-charge referrals, such as the 4 CJCs in Chittenden County, over 500 in FY23, to continue to receive, who are currently receiving funding for pre-charge, to continue receiving funding for pre-charge. There has been testimony, regarding funding and the notion of only funding one agency per county. So I just think it's important to keep that in mind. And I hear the thoughts and the intention, but oftentimes there could be unintended consequences that we do not know of until we're years down the line. So Derek, also spoke about the Section 10 in Title 24 and Title 28. We believe that the CJC statute that is in Title 24 should stay in Title 24. We don't believe it's appropriate for it to be in Title 28. The Title 24 statutes govern the role of municipality in restorative justice programs, such as the 6 CJCs that were mentioned, the 4 CJCs in Chittenden County. We are in the municipalities. These statutes are centered around the municipal pod model in which we operate and how we came to be when restorative justice program was created in Vermont. Simply put, moving the statutes into Title 28 just doesn't make any sense. Community justice centers are based in communities. We are in municipalities. Therefore, we believe it should, the statute should stay in Title 24. So we only have a couple more things, so okay. We're about to wrap up.
I have a few.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and Jill has some as well. But so in regards to the post-adjudication reparative program group, Section 4, H645 creates the post-adjudication reparative program working group to create a post-adjudication reparative program. The composition of the group was thoughtfully crafted throughout the House Corrections and Institutions Committee to ensure adequate representation by restorative justice programming. A request would be, if any additional organizations request to be involved, such as the Office of Racial Equity has done, we request that you include these additional organizations in the group of stakeholders who need to be consulted, as the Office of Racial Equity put forth as an acceptable option, so as not to change the composition of the working group. So in regard to the local financial contributions, there has been testimony suggesting to remove that. The AGL, to our knowledge, does not require local financial contributions as a receipt of program funding. So why would that be in this bill? You know, maybe like we could still get our municipal funding, but if the AGO isn't currently requiring that, then why would it be required in H 645?
Well, it's current law, so it's a policy choice as to what
Current law.
it is. In both 163 and 164. So but that is a policy decision.
Okay, we can, the funding alternatives is your final, we could get to that, and then people will be moving, because they have to go to the floor when that building.
Yeah, okay, we'll jump right into that. No
Okay,
worries. So pre-charge as defined in H 645 requires probable cause. CJCs accept referrals directly from law enforcement and others for cases that do not meet the probable cause standard. Those cases are not subject to the AGO process in H 645. However, Section 9 requires the AGO to submit a written report outlining funding alternatives, including local funding options, entities through which funding could be provided, and oversight requirements for community referrals, aka referrals to community-based restorative justice providers that do not involve criminal offenses for which probable cause has been established. We are simply not sure why the AGO is tasked with this responsibility, as these community referrals are not part of pre-charge. They're not part of post-charge. So a request would be to ensure that community referrals and funding will continue to be permitted in light of H 645, but we would also recommend deleting or amending Section 9, possibly adding the task of funding community referrals to Section 4, as DOC is currently one of the funders for these referrals.
This bill, I just have to say, does nothing to affect those referrals now. All it does is require the Attorney General office to study it.
Why is the Attorney General's office studying it when they're not going to be funding it?
They may fund it. It's because it's pre-adjudication. That's why they were selected, as opposed to the Department of Corrections, which is post-adjudication. So that's something to kind of keep in mind in the broader context of this bill.
The community referrals, though, are not criminal. They're
Correct.
Community conflict.
Correct.
There's
But
no probable
There's no
cause.
probable cause.
absolutely, I'm in agreement with you. But for DOC to continue funding it, you know, you gotta think that's even farther down the line than the Attorney General's office. That's actually, they're responsible for people that have been adjudicated. So these aren't people that are even in the process, but the Attorney General has there's been testimony that they have the capability and the know-how to assess these charges that is outside of the scope of really what DOC does. So it was a policy decision that was made by the House to have the Attorney General's office fund it, or study it.
we have to, unfortunately, the meeting is over.